Chapter 2: The Stranger. Mystified, Caleb watched the young man disappear up the lane before he turned and headed home. He thought about what the stranger had said. Obviously doesn't know my dad. He's never made Rice Krispie squares in his life, Caleb thought. Caleb had tried them at a friend's though, and concluded it was his favorite snack. Funny that guy would have mentioned them. And how did he know I had a turtle? Lucky guesses, I suppose, Caleb mused. Shaking his head once again, he turned on the path to his house and bounded up the stairs. Entering the kitchen, he was greeted by his dad. Caleb still held an image of his dad in his mind, from a few years back. A tall, athletic man, with a full head of hair. Definitely couldn't say that now. The picture in Caleb's head contrasted with the figure in front of him. His dad's hair had thinned and receded. Perhaps to replace the hair missing on the top of his head, he had also recently decided to keep some facial hair. He now sported a goatee, which he kept carefully trimmed. Overall, he had taken on a more rounded look, perhaps as a result of his desk job at the local news office and a reduced exercise regimen. In any case, he was quite a bit less athletic than Caleb recalled, even from just a couple of years ago. It was a moment before he noticed that his dad was holding a dish of baking. "Hey Caleb, how was your day? Listen, I know you mentioned how much you liked Rice Krispie squares. Guess what? I made some today," his dad exclaimed. Something in Caleb's face caused him to stop. "Are you okay, Caleb? What's the matter?" his dad asked. Caleb's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. How had the stranger known? Had he guessed? This couldn't be a coincidence. Does he know my father? Has he been stalking us? He said he had lived in the neighborhood, but I'm not completely sure of that. Who was this stranger? He felt like he was in a trance. He forced his head to clear and looked at his dad. "Thanks so much. These look great," Caleb exclaimed, reaching for one and immediately depositing it in his mouth, "and they're delicious." The words made their way through the mass of Rice Krispies in his mouth. Not daring to say anything else, he headed for his room. Laying back on his bed, he gazed at the arrays of glow-in-the-dark stars covering the ceiling of his room. As he tried to make sense of the last few events, his eyes roamed the posters of planets, the moon and various real and imaginary spacecraft that covered the walls. Things happen. We read too much into them, he thought. Random coincidences. That must be the explanation. As he had just convinced himself of that, his eyes came to rest on a set of Back to the Future posters, which included pics from the classic time travel movies of his father's time. The collector's items had been a gift from his dad. Below the posters, displayed on his dresser, was his favorite model, a replica of the time-traveling DeLorean from the same movie series. As he contemplated the vehicle, out of the corner of his eye he took notice of his terrarium. His turtle, Oscar, was on his hind legs, standing up against the glass, staring at him. With a start, he realized he had forgotten to leave food out for him before school. "I'm so sorry, Oscar. I forgot," Caleb blurted out as he quickly filled the turtle's dish. Oscar silently responded by putting his head down to eat. Caleb sat back on his bed, stunned. "You have got to be kidding me," Caleb muttered to himself as he thought back to the stranger's reminder. Another coincidence? How can that be? Confused, he lay back on his bed and stared up at the ceiling stars. He was getting the feeling that something very significant was happening, but he couldn't quite figure out what. Putting those thoughts aside, he considered once again the other issues he was dealing with. There were so many things he wanted to improve. First of all, he wanted to do much better in school. He felt that was essential if he was to have any hope of following his dreams and getting to experience all the places he thought about. After all, he was pretty sure that the members of the NASA space crew didn't get there by failing their assignments in school. On top of that, he desperately wanted to get better at sports. He thought for sure that if he could successfully join and contribute to the basketball team, he would be more popular and make more friends. Also, Caleb wanted to be able to cook and create things in the kitchen. He thought that was one way he could help his dad. There were so many things he wanted to learn and excel at, but he couldn't do any of them. He didn't even know where to start. He closed his eyes and began to drift off. It was just Caleb and his dad. It had been that way since his mom had fallen ill and passed away 2 years earlier. It was one of the reasons that he made sure to keep a good relationship with his dad. There had been some really tough issues these last couple of years. They had definitely needed each other. Throughout that time, his dad had worked hard and sacrificed a lot to make sure Caleb felt important and loved, especially after the loss of his mom. Sometimes he felt guilty about not contributing enough. Caleb felt he could and should be doing more to help. It wasn't that he was getting pressure from his dad, he just felt he should be taking on a bigger load because he didn't think things were fair for his dad. Also, something his dad had said kept resurfacing in his mind. After a particularly difficult night, with many tears from both of them, his dad had said something he had never forgotten. Caleb, not everyone comes from easy circumstances. A lot of people suffer serious setbacks but still can overcome them by learning the right methods to succeed. Caleb felt he should be doing better in school and with sports, because he wanted to make his dad proud. He also wanted to show respect for the memory of his mother and hope that she would have been proud. Little things, like mealtimes, took on a special meaning. It was the time when they checked in with each other and talked about things that were important in each of their lives. So, even though he felt he should be out looking for this stranger from the street, he found himself chopping vegetables for the dinner salad while his dad flipped the burgers. As he chopped, he struggled to focus. His mind kept straying to the stranger who seemed to know him very well. It didn't get much better through dinner. He couldn't focus on the conversation with his father, and it was obvious. Several times his dad fell silent as he waited for a response from Caleb. Lost in thought, Caleb would suddenly become aware of the awkward silence and flounder for an answer to the question he hadn't even heard. He felt his father deserved an explanation, but he couldn't quite find the words to describe what he was struggling with. "You know, Caleb, if there's something bothering you," Caleb's dad began, "you can always talk to me." "What is it?" Before he knew it, the words had leapt out, "I'm not sure you're ready to know that. In due time, I'll tell you." They were both shocked at the directness of the message. Caleb had been thinking so much about the words from the stranger that they had all of a sudden become his own. He rushed to explain, but his father put up his hand and stopped him. "Caleb, you're entitled to some private time. I don't know what all this is about, but please know that you can talk to me about anything, no matter how confusing. In the meantime, I will respect your privacy, just as long as you are safe and not in any trouble that you can't deal with." His dad's tone surprised him. He had never really been this direct with his father, and somehow he expected to get blasted for some kind of lack of respect. He thought, with a bit of pride, that his father was acknowledging that he was growing up. That reflection did not linger long, however, and thoughts of the stranger immediately returned. The meal continued in silence. When Caleb had scooped the last bit of salad up off his plate and drained the club soda fruit juice mix from his cup, he was startled by his father reaching out and putting a hand on his arm. "Leave the dishes for me to do today, son. Why don't you go off and deal with whatever is on your mind?" Caleb looked up with appreciation. "Really, Dad? Thanks. Sorry if I'm distant. I think I do need to deal with something. I'm going to start by going for a walk. I shouldn't be long." "Back by 7? To anyone else, they would have thought it was a question. But he knew his dad. It was a command. "Of course," Caleb responded, before getting up to head for the door. He wasn't sure where he was going. He just knew he had to be somewhere. As he reached the gate and thought right or left, his hand found a crumpled piece of paper in his pocket. Absent-mindedly, he pulled it out. There was a scrawled address which looked like it had been written by him, but it was like he was seeing the paper for the first time. That was odd. The address was for a site several blocks to his right. Almost without thinking, he turned and headed that way. As he approached the address, he recognized it as the abandoned house that he and his friends had occasionally met at. That's strange, he thought. Before today, I've never paid attention to the address of this place. While he stood somewhat awkwardly wondering what to do next, he heard a voice. Around the back came the shout. The voice seemed familiar, but he couldn't peg it to any of his friends. Down the side path and around to the garage, he went. There, sitting on an old lawn chair, was the stranger he had seen earlier. He realized he was not in the least surprised, but had actually been expecting him. "Have a seat, Caleb. I owe you an explanation. I know the time is now right. Ever since it happened to me 8 years ago, I've been waiting for this day." Confused, Caleb could not summon a response, but instead sat in expectant silence. "I know you are confused," the stranger began, "but I also know that you sense how significant this whole meeting is." Caleb's eyes grew wide at the mention of significance. "The reason I know is that I am you." "Huh?" Caleb looked up. "What kind of crazy thought is that?" "I know that is you, like science fiction. You especially like references to the future and time travel. What if I was to tell you that 8 years from now there is a discovery made relating to time travel? The future you, that is me, is uniquely situated to take advantage of the discovery and try some experiments. What if I was to tell you that the experiments have been successful, and that is what has allowed me to be here now? I am you, from 8 years in the future. I very much remember this actual day when my life, that is your life, changes forever. I know this all sounds confusing. It will become clearer as I have more opportunities to explain, and your understanding grows." The stranger stopped talking to let the startling news sink in.